Somewhere between love and destiny, there are choices that change everything. Yumi and Jay's story is one of those. Not a common love story, but one marked by the pain of loss, the scars of the past, and the constant search for something that seems to slip further away with each step. And perhaps, just like many of us, Yumi and Jay were destined to learn that sometimes love is not meant to be lived, but to be remembered. Yumi had always been an introspective young woman. At 24, she carried the weight of a pain that few could understand. The death of her father, a year ago, was still an open wound, one that she tried to hide under a shy smile and a reserved posture. Every movement seemed marked by nostalgia, as though the world around her was incapable of filling the emptiness within. She frequented the same cafe every morning, sitting at that corner table, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. There, in the cafe's silence, she tried to find some sort of solace, something that could calm the storm raging inside her mind. Jay, on the other hand, was a 25-year-old who, unlike Yumi, always seemed to be in motion. He never stayed in one place for too long, as if his soul was always searching for something he hadn't yet found. He grew up without a real family, his father absent and his mother drifting away from him in his early childhood. From a young age, Jay learned to rely only on his own dreams and desires, and it was from these dreams that he tried to live. He didn't know where he was going, but he was certain of one thing. He had to find something that made him feel alive. So, in each new city, with every unfamiliar face, he tried to figure out who he was, who he could be. It was on an ordinary morning, one of those days when time seems to pass without much surprise, that Yumi and Jay's paths crossed. He entered the cafe in a rush, his phone in his hand, worried about something that would happen later. He didn't see the cup of tea on Yumi's table, and when he bumped into it, the hot liquid spilled. A tea stain spread across the table, and with it, the silence between them grew. Yumi looked at him, her gaze cold and distant, an expression of someone who seemed far from everything happening around her. But Jay wasn't intimidated. He quickly apologized, more concerned about the mess he had made than about the woman in front of him. He tried to make a joke, something to break the ice, but Yumi's expression, empty and distant, didn't respond. But there was something in her face, something Jay couldn't explain. He didn't know why, but he felt she was there, trying to fight against something much larger than herself. And that drew him in. "If you allow me, I'll pay for your tea," he said, trying to be polite. "In exchange for a story about how you cursed me with that look." Yumi studied him for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had never met anyone like him. He seemed so carefree, as if life were a joke to be taken lightly. She, on the other hand, was immersed in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, trying to find a way to move forward. But there was something about him that made her smile, even if just for a brief second. "I'm not sure I'm good at telling stories," she replied, with a lightness that contradicted the storm within. "I'll listen," Jay insisted. "Sometimes, just listening is enough." And so, without any great intentions, their fate began to intertwine. In the following days, Jay began to show up at the cafe more often. It was as if he became a constant presence in Yumi's life, though she didn't quite understand how it was happening. They started talking about everything and nothing. Jay spoke about the places he wanted to visit, the dreams that were still distant, and Yumi listened, but in a different way. She didn't know it, but he made her see the world differently. Jay's words were full of hope, while hers were tinged with a pain that wouldn't dissipate. He talked about the future with sparkling eyes, and she, with tearful eyes, tried to understand if life would ever be something she could enjoy again. But what no one could have predicted was how this connection, though fragile, would be tested. Yumi, deep down, knew something was happening between them. There was an attraction, a bond she couldn't deny. But at the same time, she knew that if she allowed herself to get involved, the pain of loss would become even more intense. She had lost her father, the person she loved most in the world, and now she began to fear losing herself too. Jay, for his part, was falling in love with her, but what he felt was also a reflection of what he had never had, a family, someone to call his own. But at the same time, He feared that this love might be a mistake. He wanted to be someone, to conquer the world, but he was afraid that by giving himself to Yumi, he would be abandoning his own dreams. He didn't know how to handle it, and this doubt began to corrode what seemed like something perfect. The tension between them grew, and in a moment of desperation, Yumi made a decision. She knew she needed to distance herself, that the love between them wasn't meant to last. And with a heavy heart, she said to Jay, firmly, "I'm not what you need. You have dreams, Jay, and I am just a memory of what was lost." Jay didn't know what to say. The silence that followed was the heaviest of all. He wanted to run after her, didn't want to let her go, but something inside him held him back. He knew Yumi was right, that perhaps their love was an illusion, an escape from something much more painful. But at the same time, he couldn't accept that what they had was already fading away. The separation, though temporary, was the turning point. Jay left, continued his life, but something inside him was broken. Yumi, on her part, sank even deeper into her pain. They took different paths, but the absence of the other followed them like a constant shadow. Months passed, and both tried to move on. Jay ventured into new horizons, living the life he had always dreamed of. But no matter how hard he tried to distract himself, he couldn't forget Yumi. He knew she was left behind, but he couldn't find a place where he felt complete. Yumi, for her part, began to rebuild. Not without difficulty, but with a strength she never knew she had. She met new people, allowed herself to laugh again, but the mark Jay had left on her heart never disappeared. Missing him was a silent pain, a reminder of something that could have been but wasn't. And so, they both continued their lives, separated but always with the memory of what they had. Destiny had torn them apart, but love, that silent love, would remain forever, like a scar that became part of who they were. One afternoon, Jay returned to the city where it all began. He walked through the streets, lost in his thoughts, when by chance his eyes found Yumi in the distance. She was standing in a square, gazing at the horizon, and for a moment, he felt as though everything that had happened between them was still there, waiting to be acknowledged. She saw him, and for a brief second, their gazes met. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a silent acceptance. They were no longer the same, but something in those gazes still connected them. "Are you okay?" Jay asked, his voice softer than he expected. Yumi smiled faintly, with a sadness in her eyes. "Yes, I'm okay. And you?" "I'm trying." And so, once again, destiny proved to be unrelenting. They would not be for each other, but perhaps what they had lived was enough for both to find peace. Love sometimes is not about being together. It's about what it teaches us when we're apart. The chaos, the pain, the loss. All of it, at some point, becomes what we need to understand the true meaning of what it means to love. And although separated, Yumi and Jay understood that even from afar, love would never completely leave them. If you connected with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and leave your comment below. What would you do in their place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Let's talk.